Welcome to Rock That Relationship, a podcast about all things relationship with Corey and Tracy.
Now let's get real and start creating relationships that rock.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rock That Relationship. We are back with an episode in our series all about divorce and navigating divorce. And we're really excited today to have this conversation with Donna C, who's a psychotherapist in private practice, to really talk about, the impact of divorce, on parents and on the children of the parents who are going through a divorce, and just really kind of explore that. And I know this is a real personal topic for me. I'm a child of divorce. I also have a child from a divorce or a separation, a legal separation. And I know Tracy has her own situation as well as being divorced and having had stepchildren. And so this is a really, really critical topic. And I'm just so excited to be able to talk to Donna a little bit about getting some insight on this particular issue. So Donna, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, awesome. Well, maybe you could start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Right. So I'm a psychotherapist in private practice in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. I've been in the field of mental health for more than 30 years, working with teens, young adults, businesses, communications, internet companies, all over the place, and always trying to help with a big focus on divorce and therapy and families, because I too have been through it, yeah. As a child, yeah.
Oh, as a child. And are you married now? Not that it's
yes,
I've
been married 32 years.
Oh, wow.
Some might say it's a trauma response to what my parents put me through, but
my trauma response is getting out of every relationship after a couple of years, yeah. Right?
It's interesting though, because as children, so out of the three of us, I'm not a child of divorce, right? I got a divorce as an adult, never thought I would have been married in the first place, but I mean, my parents were separated for a little while when I was a kid, but they've been together since 1967. And so I come at it from a different perspective, having gone through it as an adult and having had children, stepchildren involved. What's the most common issues when we're talking about having children involved?
Right. So a lot of people have asked me in therapy, et cetera, in consultation, what is the best age to get a divorce for the kids? Mm-hmm. And my answer has been unequivocally, there is no best age, because even when I was in my 20s, I had some pretty strong reactions to what my parents were doing. And I think it was valid, and I think it was overlooked. So, yeah, some people might say, oh, it's better when they're pre-verbal. They don't know what's going on. But I don't really find that to be true. I think the main component is how you handle it, not just when you tell them, but for the rest of their lives.
Right. Because adult children often get just as upset as young children, right? Yeah. And young children who are pre-verbal still absorb a lot of information. I had a friend one time who was like, well, this all happened when the child was 1. She didn't know what was going on. And I'm like, oh, she knew. People know, and they pick up on energy, right?
Absolutely. I mean, remember all that Baby Einstein, they can feel in the womb. And right. So, of course, they can feel in real life, too, no matter what age they are. And older kids tend to become what's called, which also happened to me, the parentalized child. And that, of course, is a great burden when you're a teenager or a young adult. You get sucked into things which may be cognitively and intellectually, you may act like you understand, but really, do you have enough life experience to fully understand that? No.
Right. And it is interesting with kids, and maybe this is what Corey went through, of the parent talking too much and the child knowing too much. And when I was raising those kids, I was like, oh, weird. One week they seem 12, the next week they seem 18, right? And so
exactly,
you're like, where is this child? Really?
That's
and what
right.
really is their understanding?
A lot of teenagers appear. A lot of teenagers show up in therapy like they know it, like they're little, like mini know-it-alls, but they don't fully grasp. They just can't because they haven't had enough experience, and their little brains are very fragile.
Well, and I remember even beyond just the actual divorce, right? Because the divorce was my parents. They divorced when I was, I think I was around 13 or 14. I mean, I was a freshman in high school. But I mean, prior to that, there was actually one point many years before where the fighting was so bad that I actually asked one of my parents to get divorced. And so when you're talking about like that Baby Einstein thing and picking stuff up, so well, you might not pick up, maybe it wasn't for me the divorce because it didn't happen at that time, but it was just something is not right here, and I wanted them to be apart. And that is what stuck with me. And they stayed together, quote, for the kids, right? Which kind of, I see that as kind of a common phrase I've seen. Is that something that you've seen? I know we talked about the age in which people wait, but some people say they're going to try to make it and stay together for the kids.
Right. I mean, that seems to be a myth because the thing that affects the kids the most is conflict. And you could have that whether you're together or apart. It's just how you manage your conflicts is what the focus should be on. Like, I love when people ask me stuff like when and where to tell them, and just like having a baby, like, oh, we're going to do Lamaze and we're going to this and we're going to have a playlist. Well, what about the rest of their life? That's really should be your focus. And that's and in my situation, it was the opposite. I said, how could you be getting a divorce? I don't see you fighting.
Interesting.
And then my mother went on to say, like, watch out for that too, because that's another red flag when you don't even care enough to fight.
But what was, like, so you were how old when your parents got divorced or started the divorce process?
I was 15.
So what was, like, most upsetting to you? Was it, like, your family fell apart, you felt abandoned, you were, like, hurt that they did this? Like, because as a teen, I wanted my parents to get divorced, and they didn't. You know?
Yeah, well, yeah, see, there's so many nuances to it. And honestly, I could say that it took me my whole life to really figure it out. And I'm just getting there now with a lot of attention to my inner world right now. But I think, first of all, I had a delayed reaction, whatever that means. People don't talk about it. But since I was in high school, I was very busy with my friends and activities, so nothing could bother me. But then here comes some patterns, a little bit of depression, a little bit of anxiety, problems with relationships. It was penetrating even unconsciously. And that's when I started to realize, like, I got to, really dig deeper on what this how it has impacted me.
Did that lead you to choosing psychology as a career?
Kind of, yeah. I was quite drawn to it, and I've always been really good with people. So after a few false starts and other things, that I was definitely, that was my path.
Well, it seems like something you can, definitely relate to, particularly this topic. Like when you're talking about what your reaction was, we were just about around the same age, it sounds like, just kind of early high school. And I remember thinking, like, I wanted this for so long. I'm so relieved. But then when it happened, it was like, now what is the aftermath, right? Like, who do I live with? Where do I live? Going back and forth between houses and all the kind of, well, I didn't want them to be together, but at the same time, I don't know if I want this life either. And so just like what you're talking about, I ended up getting very involved in activities and was like just sort of nomadic at that point for the rest of high school. Do you see that happen too, where it's like the aftermath of the divorce, right, creates the kind of the impact that's maybe that the divorce itself doesn't necessarily attribute to?
So much. And like, I am all about schedules, right? Like, here's the thing. You pay bazillion dollars to the lawyers. You sort it all out. You talk to the therapist. And then what's the schedule? Now, I don't care what the schedule is, like if it's every third Tuesday or something with the other parent, but you must be consistent. And they always get lost in that, in that, the parents. So I always talk to them like, what do you think it does to a child when they're waiting for you and you don't show up? You know, so again and again, or I have this family that I've been working with for many years. One of them has an addiction, one of the parents, and he's telling the kid all about it and what he's going to do. And what I'm like, dude, she's 12. Like,
right. Wow.
Like, what are you talking about? You know, I'm very like, sort of casual with them. Like, I try to kind of reel them into that I'm not judging them. And then I'm like, do you see what you're saying? This is not going to help your child. You know, I really put it out there. It's not about these other things. You have to cut through the noise. Like, oh, the lawyer said this and the neighbor said that and she said this and I have it on tape. No, I'm telling you, this is not good for the children.
It's interesting because I am an attorney and I am currently practicing family law. And while we're recording this, I'm seeing, messages come up about all these terrible things. And I'm very conflict averse with my clients. I mean, if there's abuse, then we have to go to court, right? If there's other things like that, but I'm supposed to have an evidentiary hearing next week, which requires a lot of we're going to get very serious and, really go after the other person. And the other attorney was like, well, let's just have a resolution management conference. And I know that my client is a little upset about that, but I think it's actually good because we can sit with a judge in a more informal setting and these are the things that we need to deal with and deal with them. And I wish that more attorneys were like that. Now, I also wish they were much more responsive, and it's a frustrating system. And we've talked to other people this season about that, like mediation versus, litigation.
Yes, and I have done divorce mediation with my husband, who's a social worker and as well. And the same exact thing that you're saying, Tracy, I have people coming to me saying like, oh, he's not paying for college. I'm like, well, did you put it in the agreement? They're like, oops,
right.
What? Like, you've got to really make a plan that you can stick to.
Right. And discuss all of the issues, right? And I think that it's very interesting. So I do consultations and I say, okay, if you decide to hire me, then I represent you and this is going to notch up, or rack up the motion level, right? The minute you involve lawyers. So is there a way for you to do this without lawyers and to involve, it's interesting. I'm about to say involve the whole family in the process, but really taking everybody's needs into consideration. And granted, there's high conflict personality disorder people who you can't do anything with.
Yes,
right?
And I've had many of those cases over the years with lawyers involved, and nobody wins. There's no winner. Or even they get crazy about what it might say in the agreement, and then you ask the kid, well, what might be bothering you in this new? And let's say a younger kid will say, well, can I still have my Snoopy doll at Dad's house? Or or if the dad says you can paint your room blue, that's all they care about.
Right.
So why are you making it worse, basically? Ask them what they want and what they need.
I think it'd be helpful to have a therapist. So I was married to a clinical psychologist for 8 years, and I was not very, I didn't really get what she was trying to say to me. And then I have a therapist. I've been in therapy for 5 years. And so going back to my family of origin issues and dealing with those. But I always say on this podcast in our other seasons, every relationship should just start out with a therapist involved. And, people get like outraged. And it's like, just like I think now every relationship should have a prenup or an agreement about certain things, right? And if you start the divorce process, I think we should have, I don't know, just not necessarily a mediator, but we should have somebody who helps to, I mean, there are situations where there's abuse, right, where you literally can't. But like most divorces, you could have somebody like yourself helping the people first to think about all the issues. How are we going to do this?
Right. Like one time I had this family in my office years ago, and they were fighting about the shoes, that this kid keeps leaving the shoes at his dad's house and then mom's house. And at one point I stood up and I said, listen, I'm going to go and get 2 pairs of shoes. So we can move away with this. So we could move forward. Because it's so ridiculous. They just they start to get lost in the same patterns they had when they were together.
Yeah, and it needs somebody to break that. Right.
And also, I always tell people, it's not like, it doesn't have to be like it is on TV, like with these contentious law, courtroom drama and kids getting, God knows what. It doesn't have to be that way. But many people are not educated about mediation. And the minute there's one thing, they're like off to the lawyers,
Right. Well, and I think, and I am a licensed mediator, and you don't have to be licensed, or I guess I'm a trained mediator, but I did just hear a story of a mediator who is biased and is causing a lot more problems in this situation. And I do think, like, if we look at it holistically and let's have a therapy component, let's have a mediation component, and then litigation is really our last case, worst case scenario, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So when I say that, I'm making a lot of money doing it, but still. Well,
But I wanted to ask you, Donna, really your thoughts on, to what extent do you see people who are going through divorce actually I don't want to say paying attention to their children's needs, but sometimes you get caught up and kind of lose sight of that, and you're pushing and pulling over a pot or a pan in the kitchen, and don't really tend to the child, especially not even getting them therapy or those kind of things, or making sure that they have their shoes. I mean, at what stage are you coming into this process with these kids that are seeing is it late?
All different phases of it. I see people. Oh, she froze.
There she is.
Okay.
You're just very still.
Yeah, I see people at all different phases, and you mentioned in one of your questions that I looked at, what about this nesting idea? Can you hear me?
Yes. And nesting, you mean where the child stays in the house and the parents go to different houses?
That is like the worst thing I ever heard in my life.
We always say that.
We said that too.
One of my clients, she was a 16-year-old girl, not yet driving, right? Middle child on the tennis team. She just got back from practice. No one's home. Now it's around 4, 5, 6 o'clock. She calls me. She goes, Donna, I don't really care whose turn it is, but I'm really hungry and I need to know who's making dinner. And that just basically blew my mind. Like, I was like, of course you want dinner. Who cares who's in, who's out? It's like, it's completely missing the needs of the child.
Well, I think so. I've had friends that have done that. I advised against it. The way I see it is that it causes more conflict among the parents. And now they're going back and forth, and one is actually cleaning the house more because the other one didn't clean. Now, what if they want to, have relations, with somebody else? And what? They're going to be having sex with somebody in the extra house, and then that person has to come there and stay there?
That's what they were doing.
Right?
That's what they were doing. I was like, something's not right here.
And then they don't separate. The parents don't end up separating. It's like, you're going back and forth between this house versus you're adults. This is the way I look at it. Maybe I'm wrong, but the adults are the ones who need to get their own space. They need to they're going to have this new life, right? And then the child can easier adjust as long as you're staying like within, a decent drive. Okay, so I have clients in the state of Arizona, you're allowed to move up to 99 miles away without getting consent from the other parent. I advise everybody not to do that. That's terrible. Even if their ex is like annoying, kind of stalky-ish. I mean, I'm not talking murder stalking, but stalking. Oh, I see you weren't there the other night. I say then we'll use the police for that, right? If it turns into stalking. But if you're going to move far away, you're going to make everybody's life much more difficult, including your own.
My father moved to California, and I'm in New York. So was the
And then did he want custody?
No.
Or time? Oh.
No. But each time he came back and forth, like a couple times a year, it was traumatic all over again.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the research years ago used to say sometimes it's even better for the child if the parent dies than if they have a contentious divorce, because it just keeps going and going, and weddings and funerals and bar mitzvahs, and there's always something to deal with.
Mm-hmm. I mean, my parents, they actually ended up living in the same school district. Uh-huh. So I lived with my mom for part of high school. I lived with my dad for part of high school, and I could go back and forth as I needed. And that was really helpful. And then same thing with my ex who I co-parent with, but now we co-parent across state lines, which is very difficult. We have to have a primary parent, and we've switched that. She was a primary parent for a couple years, and then I'm now the primary parent because we're looking at where our daughter wants to go to school and where she wants to live, and she dictates that. But I mean, I've even asked my own daughter, I said, what has it been like going back and forth? I mean, wouldn't it have been better if we would have stayed in the same place? And she's even said things like, oh, no. I like that you have your own lives and then I get to be independent and go back and forth. And so kind of debunking that myth that, that there's some kind of stability in nesting, because there isn't. You're constantly changing out sort of the head of household, and the rules change, but you're in the same space, and it probably gets very confusing, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's overwhelming, and you have to be able to sit down with them and give them the attention and the time that they need. Like, I was a people pleaser as early as I could remember, and I sort of gave over my agency to my parents' divorce and said, "Oh, you do you." It was a role reversal from the start. And then, so no wonder I became anxious and depressed later on, because I was in way over my head.
But here's the other thing. I also think if you're not nesting, if both the parents go and get their own place, then the children get to see who those parents are as themselves, right?
Yes.
Because you meet so many people who say, oh, I got out of that relationship. In fact, I was having lunch with a friend yesterday who said she's finally getting to know herself after several, lifelong bad relationships. And it's like, if you don't go and see that parent in their own, environment, you may never know that person. And if you're sharing, if the parents are going back and forth, then they're going to not act like themselves because they're always sharing space with the other partner still.
Oh, that's a good point. And I hear a lot of fathers say this, and a lot of kids say it about their fathers. I never really knew him until the divorce, because then he was sort of forced to spend quality time with me.
Right. Like they both have to cook for you, and they both have to maybe, help you with homework.
They have to be themselves.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a great point. Yeah.
That's the thing, I think, is yes, when you become a parent, you must give a lot of yourself to your children. But as we see, in my opinion, children growing up with parents who are not fully formed as individuals because they're always putting themselves on the back burner. And I feel like, and that's what I work with some of my clients about, as well as, I do have some clients. I have a client who has physically fought with his children, and right now he doesn't have time with them. And I said, look, we can spend a lot of money to go to court and fight this, but we're not going to win. And I can tell you, having, had this growing up, if you don't fix this now, if you don't take responsibility, you are not going to have a relationship with your adult children.
Right.
And that is so important, right? And I do think that when two adults are so wrapped up, they cannot break themselves of that conflict. and it keeps it going. And I think Corey's parents, like the fact that they had this contentious divorce for years, right? Like that's so destructive to them, to their kids, and it doesn't allow them to go and be the person that they should be.
Right. It makes the parents quite self-absorbed in a certain way, and then they're unavailable. And then another thing about the dads and the one-on-one time is that sometimes they're schlepping like 2 or 3 kids on their weekend. Maybe just take one,
right?
Once in a while.
Right.
They love that. They make them feel
alone time.
Special. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. So my stepchildren, their father lived in Europe, and he saw them 4 times a year, and they had a wonderful relationship with them. And, they had their own cell phones that they communicated with him when at their discretion. And I think that that's what people need to understand. It's not always the amount of time you spend. It's how you spend it, and it's how you actually prioritize that person. And I feel like there's so many misconceptions of how things have to be. And what I've seen is this fighting over 50-50 usually is about money. It has nothing to do with, I've got to be with this kid. I've even seen a client's ex sent an email that said, you have 3% more time than me. I'm not going to allow this. And it's like, oh, my God.
Or back and forth consenting to a medical thing. Or that's the stuff that I try to help them be, minimize and become aware of. And there's even a thing called the Children's Bill of Rights in Divorce that I used to give to them, like the right to be heard and the right to not be sucked into the issues.
So do you work more with like the children themselves if they're going through a divorce, or do you ever do anything with the families even if they're divorced? Like do you ever see ex-couples come in with their kids and work through things?
I did more of that before the pandemic, but what I do is I start with a teenager typically, and I let them be in the driver's seat. They're driving the boat. And if that takes 3 weeks or 3 months or even a year before they tell me this is too much. And then I say, would you like me to call in one or both of them? And they get to decide, assuming, again, that there's nothing objectionable going on. But, okay, and then I just did it the other day. And then the mother or father might come on the Zoom with my client, and I help the teenager express their needs to the parents in the session and make that very clear. I only work for you. I don't work for the school. I don't work for the other parent. I work for you. And once they trust me to do that, they're able to let out a lot that they hold.
That's awesome, and I think that is something that's really lacking, and I don't see it at all. I do recommend that my clients take their kids to therapy, but there's no advocate for the child, right? And I just had a best interest attorney appointed on a termination where the father hasn't seen the child in 5 years. It's a 9-year-old, and the attorney, talked to the child like the child was an adult, like understanding these issues. And it's like, come on, a child needs a decent therapist, I think.
Right. They used to have one case I had for many years had the kid waiting outside the law guardian's door when they had the different meetings, and she could hear what they were saying.
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because clients have said, can I bring my child? I'm like, no, children are not allowed in the courtroom. Can my child testify? No, we can have your child interviewed. And, here where I live, they interview them by conciliation court, which is fairly decent,
and also I have cases where one of the parents says, I have him on recording saying this, and go on and on with paragraphs and paragraphs. I'm like, nobody cares. The judge doesn't care about your text messages. Like they can't get past it.
Well, and like as you're talking about this idea, both of you talking about like the children are picking up on this stuff, whether you're inviting them into the courtroom or they're eavesdropping or whatever, but they're also noticing behaviors. And I think about this scenario where you have one parent, maybe there's a co-parenting situation. I was in a 50-50 in my split, not with my parents, but my own split. And, what happens when, you're in that kind of a thing where it's relatively 50-50 and one parent ends up just doing more of the heavy lifting. They're the one who's going to the parent-teacher conferences. They're the one who's remembering to buy the birthday present for the party this weekend, even if it's not their parenting time, because the other one falls through with things. They don't keep their promises. But it's not so much the distribution of that labor. It's more that when the child notices the distribution of that labor and says something like, why isn't so-and-so getting me this?
Yeah, but it isn't fair to the parents, and we know who does the bulk of that work, which is women.
Of course, yes. And you know what else? Someone came to us for mediation once and said, I think I deserve $150K because I did all the forms for all the years of the kids. It's probably worth even more than that.
Probably. And I mean, I was in the same sex relationship, so it wasn't even an issue of women. It's just, and we didn't really have this issue, but I have seen this issue even in same sex parenting where one parent does more and the other kid notices. And so what do you recommend that maybe if you're the parent who your kid's coming to you and saying like, why doesn't ... do ... How do you help them without bad mouthing that X really respond to questions like that when kids are noticing the disparity?
Yeah, see, kids, first of all, they know things. Obviously, we can all agree they know much more than we. And then the thing is, like, I'm doing therapy, right? So therapy is about not stuffing down your feelings. If a kid is stuffing down their feelings and then they report, oh, gee, I'm really anxious, I'm like, would you look at that? So I tried to help them just give voice to it and validate. That's what therapists do. It's yes, of course you would feel that way. One kid says, I can't trust my dad. He's been doing all these horrible things. I'm like, yes, you're right. How could you? How could you? And I'm so glad you could tell me.
See, validating. Because that's the thing. I think that there's a lot of enabling. There's a lot of enabling in relationships. And I do tell my clients it's not your responsibility to make sure that that parent has a healthy relationship with their children. If that other parent wants to have a healthy relationship with their children, then they need to do that. It's not your job anymore, which it never was, but they do it in relationship. I said it's not your job. Your job is to be the parent that you are.
Yeah, like I like to try to maybe open up a channel for more communication, right? Isn't that the goal? Like, it's not always going to be good or perfect or elegant even, but it helps. It's support. It's support, and kids will say at the end of those sessions, like, "Wow, I do feel a lot of relief."
So like if you're the parent and not the therapist though, and your kid is starting to tell you this, you definitely don't want them to stuff it down. I mean, do you validate it and say yes, that is your experience, or do you tell them, you try to empower them to have agency to speak up for themselves to tell the other parent what they need, or do you go maybe as that parent to the other parent and say, hey, listen, our kid is really having issues with the way you're doing this? Like, what is it? You're in the moment there. What do we?
I would say all of the above. You really have to use your experience and your judgment to sense, whether it's a crisis or whether it's a conversation or whether it's a family meeting or whether, I think the best case scenario is when the kid, yes, is empowered to speak their mind to the parent that needs it, and they need to hear it. And parents can react well to those kinds of meetings, those kinds of sessions, because they're really a lot of times oblivious.
Adding an extra layer in there, you have either I know quite narcissistic parents, possibly abusive parents, these things that are happening. And I tell my clients, like, okay, so get the child a therapist, right? Like, if the court is not acknowledging that certain things are happening, if DCS is ineffective, if, these are things, then get your child into a therapist. Empower your child with agency, okay, to say, I'm not going to tolerate this. Or, at a certain age, we can have them interviewed. Some, they can't be interviewed.
Yes, I've done that. I've done that, but I think there is, it's also quite difficult, where they, they might resist because, of a lot of factors, and they might even be afraid, because
the
those
children,
are already high conflict,
right.
situations. It's a better outcome when it's like a moderate to mild situation.
Right.
Yeah. In those kind of cases that you're describing, I've been able to help maybe mitigate some of the damage, but some of them, they'll just go on for God knows how long. Well, years and years.
Well, and these kids have to return back into these homes, so they might come and have some refuge with you for a little bit and then go back into these spaces that just sometimes might even undo or,
Or the kids, are starting to talk about like, well, Dad didn't pay Mom this week, so yada, yada, yada. Now I can't get my teeth clean. I'm like, how do you even know that?
Right. Well, that's, parental alienation. That shouldn't be occurring. But, I mean, like, traumatic situations, and then, I mean, my understanding of trauma.
Cases.
Right.
Yeah.
But the trauma is worsened when it's not, the child doesn't get support or help, right? And so things happen in life, and as long as then it is dealt with, or that the child isn't isolated further. I think that that's so important, right?
And things get locked inside. And there's a newish kind of therapy that's getting a lot of attention these days. It's a trauma-informed therapy. It's called internal family systems. It's all the rage. And they talk about how these exiles, like pieces of yourself, get broken off.
Right.
Because they're so wounded. They're so traumatized. And how can we bring them back after they've been, some of the best parts of yourself had to be locked away out of fear?
Well, that Pixar movie, Inside Out does, I think, the best representation ever of showing that, right? The islands in Riley's mind. And, that's the thing of, like, in that movie, the rug was pulled out from under her and the parents were not there. And so then parts of her mind start to, like, be sealed off, right? Yeah, exactly.
And then later on, bigger problems come. Absolutely.
Yes.
Well,
and some of these trauma treatments, by the way, are free and accessible, like meditation, exercise, breathing, walking, singing, drawing. You can harness those parts of yourself by learning how to relax your body again and not be in that constant fight or flight. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I was thinking too, as you were saying that, is this idea of like sometimes, people are really good at being able to compartmentalize or block these pieces. And for kids who are pretty adept at doing that, it can also make it look like they're just fine.
Exactly.
Especially, I know as a teenager, I experienced that, and because it was just like, okay, well, I have other things to do. I don't want to focus on this. And so I could just lock that away. And then it looked to my parents, even if they were very well-intentioned parents that were attuned to my needs, it looked like I didn't need anything.
That's exactly was my experience. And then I also, go ahead, Tracy.
Oh, I was going to say, I know exactly what happened. Corey became the high-achieving person. I rebelled, like I became a rebel and like did all kinds of terrible bad things. And Corey became the overachiever.
Right.
Well, I was an overachiever at birth. I literally came out of the womb with like a to-do list. But Donna, what were you saying about your experience?
Oh, a lot of the young adults, which I also work a lot with, like a 20, 21, 22, wrapping up college, and then all of a sudden I'll say, well, does this remind you of something? And then they'll say, like they're starting out with their first relationships, like, and then I'll link it back. I call it connecting the dots. Can you connect the dots back to when this first happened? And again, it will be something from their parents' split that they had never really bothered to acknowledge before. And then it's like a light bulb. It's like, oh, that's why I'm afraid in these situations, because this already happened. Back when I was younger.
And it's a breakup for kids, right? Like, this is what I always say, like, if they love both of their parents, it's like, I love this person, I love that person, now I can't be with them together. So it really is it's a breakup for them as well, right?
Exactly. You feel like literally split. And that was also a very big part of my experience. Where do I put myself?
Mm-hmm. And where do you spend your time if these people can't be together?
Yeah. And even almost like spiritually, where do I put myself? Like, it's a lot of confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing that therapy can help with. Just like, wait a minute, is this even your problem to begin with? No. Okay, let's put that aside.
Right.
And then where is this other confusion coming from? Let's break it down, or let's get you some answers. You got it. It's very practical the way I try to do it. I don't use fancy words. I laugh with them. Just trying to connect. Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the anger wheel? It's more used in other things, I think.
Yeah. Or feelings wheel. Yeah.
I like the anger wheel. I just learned about that last month, and I never heard of it. And I used to be a cop. I've worked at a domestic violence shelter. I love very bad, traumatizing stuff, right? And this anger wheel is so great because you like put spokes out there, and then you write like all these things. And if like you're mad because your dad was arrested, or your mom and dad got divorced. Okay, well you can't. We're mad, we're upset, we're hurt, but that's out of your control. So let's put that where it belongs. Now, are these things, the public embarrassment, or the fact that how am I going to get to my activities, or, which school am I going to go to? And then you could deal with each one. It's like a spoke of a wheel,
Right. Exactly. Any way that you can identify, name the feelings, it reduces confusion. Yeah.
And I think of another thing when you're talking about this confusion too, is, beyond even just the confusion of your own feelings if you're the child going through the divorce, is also this kind of guilt of allegiance, right? This idea that if I spend too much time with this parent, or I don't have my birthday with this parent, or maybe there's a custody pull and it's like, if you love me, you'll be with me, kinds of things. How do you work through kids who feel like maybe their allegiance is being tested as a child because they have now two parents they have to, in some ways choose, or feel like they have to choose?
Right. Well, if possible, I always try to educate the parents to stop doing that. I mean, it's horrible. Horrible. Like, and remind them of when they were teenagers or whatever. Like, would they have liked that? No way. So here are these kids. They're trying to separate, become more independent, and then they're caught in the push-pull with their parents, and then the world that we live in, like, they're completely overwhelmed. Even in a good situation, they're completely overwhelmed. So yeah, I just try to, the things like, oh, it's not your fault, or you don't have to take sides. I don't think they're so great. I like to help them just express it, write it down, get it out, bring in more support, like that. Speaking of a wheel, I once went to a lecture where the guy said, find all the supports around the kid's wheel, and if needed, bring them in.
I like that. Well, because your responses where you're talking about, like, you don't have to choose, or it's going to be okay. It sort of placates and really kind of belittles their concern. It's like, well, maybe it's not going to be okay, or maybe I do feel like I have to choose sides.
Right. And it's more subtle than that, all the different things. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So what would you say are ways that parents, some of the best ways that parents can support their children as they go through, their own divorce, and they're grieving their own divorce, but understanding that their kids are doing that too? Are there some things that that just like you would always recommend or commonly recommend? You say these are really good practices parents can do during the divorce process. Yeah,
there's a book called Mom's House, Dad's House. You probably know it, Tracy. And so that's number one. Keep things as consistent as possible in both homes. not perfect, but consistent. If you say you're going to pick up on Tuesday, pick up on Tuesday. If Dad says bedtime's 9:00, it would be really good if Mom said bedtime was 9:00 too. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest one I hear. The biggest, like just complete mayhem at one house and complete structure at the other or whatever. Like that's just a recipe for disaster. Watch out for more serious red flags like sleep issues in the kid, withdrawal, mood issues with the kid, anger issues, anything that I call a red flag, watch for that. Talk to the professionals at the school if you're worried. There's lots of free help available. And then don't extend the divorce for 100 years because the only people who win are the lawyers.
Mm-hmm. It's true. I agree. 100%.
Yeah,
and it doesn't even help. Long term, the lawyers aren't even happy, right? I don't think there's probably 10% of lawyers who are personality disordered, maybe 20%, maybe 50%, but they may enjoy it, but generally it's not enjoyable, right?
Mm-hmm.
No.
No. And it just drains I sometimes say that 40 grand that you just put down over there for the lawyers, that could be the first year of college.
Right.
Or summer camp or whatever. What are you?
But I'll tell you, my clients really, I do come at all my clients are willing to settle, and it's the other side. And when those personality disordered people find their lawyer, those people makes it so much harder. It's so frustrating.
Right.
And I can't do anything about it.
Right. Or college kids who are food insecure from a divorce I heard about recently. The father stopped paying in the middle of college and then the kid had to scramble, or the mother forgot to fill out XYZ form and they never got, the housing there's so many forms to do with college. I almost had a nervous breakdown.
Right.
Imagine if you have two warring parents with all that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just too much. For
my best friend's daughter, is going to Georgetown, and she was applying for an internship at the White House a couple of years ago or last year, and the father has been not only evil but in and out, and to do all that, to get all of that done, and I just said we have to, he's mental health issues and he's not available. But then when you have somebody who's actively trying to tank things, which I've seen also, where they're just not cooperative.
Right, or they make the kid do it because the kid is smart. They could do it probably if they really want to, but they're having a breakdown. They can't. How many things could they do?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Wow.
Well, I ordered this book. I'm going to get this book, Mom's House, Dad's House.
I know I haven't heard of it. I'm going to look it up too. I'll put it in the show notes for our listeners as well, along with a lot of really good details about things.
And she has something else called the Co-Parenting Toolkit. I think would be really helpful. And that's the other thing that's last point I want to make is just that, just like with anything, right? When we started a new career, we started a new hobby, whatever, divorce is something you need to educate yourself. If you're going through the divorce process, you cannot put your head in the sand. You must educate yourself and understand, okay, what are all the things? What are all the components? And, not only kids, but pets also as well suffer. So, the adults do, the kids do, and I think if we looked at it that way, okay, if we take everybody into consideration and let's do this the best way possible.
Right. But as you pointed out earlier, Tracy, the parents become so self-absorbed in their own, finding themselves in this thing that there's plenty of neglect that comes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. Well, Donna, this has been a really great conversation. I know that our listeners are going to be interested in finding out more about you and maybe getting in touch with you. I know you said you're out of New York, so I know that you have licenses probably to practice in New York. But How can they find out more about you? Is there a way to connect with you?
Right. I have my website and the wonderful lady who designed it for me, Rachel Miller. It's donnacmoss.com. And on the very front, there's something called the course. And that's a way that's what I'm trying to promote here. It's a 2-hour self-paced course where any parent or therapist from any state can learn about how to work with teens in therapy.
Awesome.
Oh, that's great. I'll put that in the show notes.
Which is so needed now because there's such a huge uptick in teen, mental health issues.
Right. Awesome.
Well, this has been really excellent. Great conversation. We completely appreciate you taking the time to be on here with us, Donna. Thank you so much. And thanks, Tracy, for piping in. It's always really interesting to do these conversations because we have someone who's an expert in the field, and then we have me who's I'm a professor who teaches emotional intelligence, so I'm always coming from that angle. Tracy's coming from the legal angle. So these always end up being like such interesting conversations. And
so interesting. I think I could talk to you two all day.
That's right. Woohoo! Unfortunately, I have to go do some billing.
Oh, there you go. And I have to go do some grading. So there we go.
I have to walk the dog.
All right. Well, awesome. Well, again, Donna, thank you for being on. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And for all our listeners out there, until our next episode, go out there and rock those relationships. If you liked what you heard, check out our show notes for resources from today's episode. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram under Rock That Relationship, and go to our website at rockthatrelationship.com for updated episodes and more great information.
Thanks for listening. Now go rock those relationships.